Here are 10 signs that you are a frugal person. You'll learn at the end of this clip if you are a cheap person or if someone around you is a frugal person. And keep in mind, while you watch the film, that being thrifty is not the same thing as being cheap. You may wonder, isn't that the same thing? The correct response is no. The question now is, how can you recognize a cheap person? Number 1, they never go someplace that would be considered glamorous. If your buddy constantly says no to going out with you, you shouldn't assume they are a miser or a cheap person. They may be just introverted, or maybe they're working hard to maintain a budget and manage their expenses. However, there is a set of individuals who would never consider visiting a location merely because it is fancy, and these are the folks that we like to refer to as cheap. These people will never consider visiting a place simply because it is fancy. Cheap people think that going to excellent locations wastes time and money. For instance, they constantly recommend supper at a local restaurant to save a few dollars. They are not interested in trying anything new since they would rather spend their time doing something already known. This advice is not meant to encourage you to go to more luxurious locations than your budget allows. It's not about going to expensive restaurants all the time, but every once in a while. It's nice to treat yourself to restaurants where the menus aren't coated in plastic. Neither of these things is required, and if dining at luxurious restaurant isn't your style, you can always go to a sophisticated location like an art museum or a wine tasting experience. Both of these are great options. Number 2, cheap people would rather spend time calculating their money than really spending it. If you saw programs like Everyone Hates Chris when you were younger, you probably remember Chris's dad as the kind of person who counted his money down to the very last coin. There have been memes created regarding the impulse to waste money on pointless purchases, and some of them connect to the spending attitude that Chris's father had. Just keep in mind that folks who are cheap often tend to stockpile little amounts of money. They have a propensity to hang on to what they have and attempt to find out methods by which they can protect it until the next payment comes due. Cheap people might easily waste hours of calculating how much money they have rather than spending any of it. A miser is content with what they have, unlike wealthy individuals who always want to get more. If you are additionally preoccupied with always being aware of how much money you have, then there is a reasonable probability that you are frugal. Find a means to free yourself from this shackle and think about ways that you might boost your income. Number 3, they are prepared to reduce the level of quality to save money. As I said before, those who are frugal dislike the concept of wasting money and would instead save what little they have to fulfill their needs than part with it. When this is taken into consideration, it is not surprising to consider the extent to which a cheap person might go to save some money. Cheap people prioritize spending less money and are prepared to make concessions in terms of quality, value, and time to realize short-term savings. It's more like anxiety over parting with one's cash. If you are acquainted with the program Cheapskates, then you are aware that some of the characters on the show will go to extreme lengths to save money, including purchasing stale food and items since they can obtain them for meager rates or even for free in some cases. As long as some money is left over, people do not care about the potential adverse effects of these things on their health. People who are cheap don't care about things as much as those who are thrifty, who are resourceful and will spend their money on the things most important to them. They don't want to part with their money. Number 4, they recycle the tea bags and cups. Side note, if you are caught doing it once or twice, it is okay, and you can get away with it. If you make it a habit or stockpile a pile-up for the next brew, you are cheap. Maybe you didn't realize this, and that's okay. We get it. A single tea bag may last for quite some time. It's common knowledge that tea bags are less costly than pricey coffee and provide a convenient and speedy replacement for the beverage. Do not be so cheap as to disgrace yourself in front of the other people by continuing this practice. Number 5, avoiding meals on purpose to save money. Some people are unwilling to spend the money necessary to purchase a meal. They may even consider average quality. They do not lack the financial means to do so. Instead, they do not see the point in consuming such a large quantity of food because, let's face it, food costs money, and cheap people don't see that point in spending it. They eat less. They spare no expense to preserve their lives to the fullest. They will never fail to explain why they cannot consume food, and they will resort to whatever means necessary to save their money. Number 6, they are never without an excuse for their lack of financial resources. People that are cheap constantly appear to have an explanation about why they don't have enough money. People that are cheap constantly appear to have an explanation about why they don't have enough cash on them. Most of the time, people come up with excuses such as forgetting their wallets or even lying and claiming they spent all of their pay. And both of us are aware of the direction they are going with this. The fact of the matter is that it is all a lie. If you want to know the answer to the real issue, which is when precisely do they get to spend the money that they always do not have, the answer is that they never do. Cheap individuals are said to spend a lot, which is surprisingly coming from someone who isn't fond of parting with their cash. Number 7, cheap individuals are more likely to make poor financial decisions. If errors were common, then persons with low standards would be used to them by this point. People who constantly spend less money find fault with the things they buy. After lowering their quality standards to that extent, what do they anticipate would happen? The most upsetting thing is that they will not only not repair it, but they won't even replace it because they're cheap like that. Number 8, concentrates on how much something costs. Cheap individuals make other people exceedingly uncomfortable because they continually concentrate on how much something costs. And it's okay to be careful about spending on things. Nevertheless, it's okay to be cautious about splurging on things. They are going to take that and turn it into a song. Costs, not need and perceived value, is the driving factor behind every purchase. Suppose you find yourself in a position where you need to scam an inexpensive buddy. In that case, you have to show them a knockoff version of anything and then lie about how much money they would save by purchasing it from you rather than the original. Number 9, they will almost always allow you to pay for your purchases. Cheap individuals will try to avoid spending money in any way possible. Thus, if you hang around with cheap people, you will see that they will constantly put the bill on you to pay. Do not conflate being broke with having a low moral standard. Do not accuse your buddy or lover of being cheap. It is the rainy season because they may feel under the weather. However, cheap individuals will go to great lengths to avoid paying their expenses. They will always try to get you to pay the bill. In addition to this, regardless of the circumstances, they always make an effort to divide each bill down to the last coin. In case you were wondering, the fact that they make more money than you does not change the fact that they will still demand that you pay. Number 10, poor people seldom allow themselves to develop interests outside of work. Okay, in my view, this is genuinely rather sad. Cheap individuals would go to the length of depriving themselves of their interests to avoid spending money. This is because they want to save money. Possibly, you are wondering why someone would act in such a way on earth. To put it another way, a miser would. Because they do not want to own or rent a bicycle. Even a pastime as easy as cycling may seem to them to be a challenging activity. Because they can get by with the absolute minimum, they do not have time for guilty pleasures like cooking, which might potentially have therapeutic benefits. If you know someone was often making up reasons not to participate in their activities, you can bet that they are trying to save money. You may be under the impression that this is a derogatory video about cheap people. But congrats for making it this far. We wanted to bring to your attention that these characteristics of being inexpensive are not always indicators of poor quality of life. Putting money down for a rainy day is the best way to live within your means. But in addition to that, we would like to bring to your attention that there are occasions when you should not lower the requirements for quality simply because you are trying to save money. I hope you liked and learned something from today's video. If you want to keep improving and being inspired, subscribe and press the bell button to be alerted whenever we upload a video. This has been Market Profits Institute.